always talk on the podcast of we have that how you can get involved section. And sometimes it's literally call your congressperson about this thing that's happening. Sometimes it's donating to an abortion fund, but sometimes it's just having conversations with people. And it sounds like you're not really doing anything, but you don't know who you're talking to at any given moment and what you're going to say that may change their mind.
Welcome to Season of Stuck, the podcast that takes a deep dive into the all-too-human experience of feeling stuck. I'm your host, Deanna and on this podcast, we explore all things stuck. How and why stuckness happens, what it feels like, how to learn and grow from it, and ultimately, how to get unstuck and move forward in an authentic, empowered way. If you are looking for insights, support, and community as you make your journey from stuck to unstuck, you're in the right place. Now, let's jump into today's episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Season of Stuck. My name is Deanna. I am your host, and I just want to say thank you for being here. Whether this is your first time listening or you've been tuning in since the beginning, you are such an important part of this community. And I'm just so grateful to be on this journey with you. So, next week is the inauguration here in the United States. And I know there are a lot of people that are feeling stuck as we move into this next chapter of our history, myself included. It's been hard. I've been feeling afraid and sad and at times hopeless at the state of things and where it seems we're headed. But I didn't want to stay stuck in that fear or sadness or hopelessness. I wanted to do something. And so today we're going to talk about some of the things that are going on and what we can do about them. And more specifically, we're going to be talking about the threat to sexual and reproductive rights in our country. Now, let me be clear. I believe in women's rights to bodily autonomy, to choose what and who is right for themselves in their lives, and to be able to access safe, comprehensive reproductive care, including abortions. But since Roe v. Wade was overturned in 2022, those rights have been taken away from many, many women, and many more are at threat of losing those and other rights in the future. Which is why it is more important than ever for us to be having conversations about what is happening in this country and supporting organizations and movements that are fighting for women's health and sexual and reproductive rights. And on today's episode, we have the absolute privilege of having someone who is on the front lines of that fight on the show. Jennie Wetter is the director of the rePROs Fight Back initiative, where she fights every day for sexual and reproductive health, rights, and justice. Jennie is also the creator and host of the rePROs Fight Back podcast, which is a deep dive into sexual and reproductive health, rights, and justice issues like abortion, birth control, sex education, women's rights, LGBTQ+ rights, and more. During our conversation, Jennie and I talk about the current state of sexual and reproductive health in America and the stuckness so many of us are feeling in response. We also talk about the power of action, even small actions, for impacting real change. And Jennie shares concrete tips and strategies for how to get involved and start taking that action. This is such an important conversation and such an important thing for all of us to be talking about and thinking about and actively working to change. And again, it was such a privilege to have it. Let's jump into my conversation with Jennie. Jennie, welcome to Season of Stuck. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
I am so excited to talk to you today. I think the work that you're doing is so important and so timely, and it just really feels like a privilege to have you here to talk about some of these issues. I know that there are a lot of people who are feeling stuck and scared in relation to women's reproductive rights. And so I'm really thrilled to be able to speak to those people and to that stuckness and hopefully offer them some insights and support and hope as we move forward.
Yeah, I'm so excited. And it's so easy in this moment to feel overwhelmed and not have your thoughts together. Like the attacks on sexual and reproductive health and rights are coming from so many different areas all at once that it can be so easy to feel stuck at this moment.
100%. And, stuckness by design, you get stuck there, right? So it's all about fostering these conversations, like having an open dialogue about how and where we're stuck, and then supporting each other as we move from stuck to unstuck. And I know that that's a huge part of your work. So I guess to kick things off, I would love if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah, so Jennie Wetter, my pronouns are she, her. I host the rePROs Fight Back podcast, and I'm the director of the rePROs Fight Back initiative at the Population Institute. So we fight for a world where everyone is guaranteed bodily autonomy and where everyone is freely able to exercise their sexual and reproductive health and rights, no matter who they are or where they live. I mean, it's such a small thing, right? It seems so simple and basic, but that's just not the world we're living in right now. And the podcast is part of that. Actually, the podcast came first. The initiative grew out of the podcast. So, the podcast, each week, we do a deep dive into an issue related to sexual reproductive health, rights, and justice. We talk about what that issue is, what's happening around it right now, what needs to change. Generally, that's kind of the format. Sometimes it changes a little bit depending on the topic. But we always end somewhere that I felt was really important to not get into the stuck, right? Because we could just get paralyzed on this issue and feel so overwhelmed, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted to have people leaving feeling empowered. So we always end the episode with what can our audience do? How can they get involved and fight back?
That makes me want to applaud because you speak so directly to the stuckness that I know I can speak for myself and a lot of people in my life are feeling. And that is this stuckness and feeling overwhelmed and like helpless. Like, where do I go? What do I do? How do I support these movements that I believe in? And that overwhelm and that almost like analysis paralysis, like, which lane do I take, can feel really overwhelming and stuck making. So I love that you are about helping people take action and take that first step out of the stuckness and towards a solution. I think that's incredible.
Yeah, it was one of those things that when I was given this freedom to create this podcast, that trying to think of what I wanted. We started it when we're recording this like 7 years ago, and it was during the midst of the first Trump administration, and so many changes and policies were being released so fast. It was really hard to keep up, and you were so easily feeling overwhelmed. And again, that's like part of like authoritarianism and stuff, right? To feel overwhelmed so you don't fight back and so you don't engage and so you give up. And like that is the power they're trying to wield. So it is so important to stop that. So by not just focusing on the problem, but finding ways that people can get involved. And sometimes it's big ways, sometimes it's small ways. There are so many different ways that people can engage in these issues. And it's also important. You can get overwhelmed by the issue, but you can also get overwhelmed by thinking, I need to do all the things. And you don't. And like, this is not me speaking to your audience. This is me speaking to me because I still get in that of like, I need to do all the things. I need to go to that protest. I need to donate to all the places. I need to do all the things. But this is not a moment for that. This is finding where you can help and stepping in at those times. And this is going to be a long 4 years. As you know, I know it sounds so trite, but this is absolutely a marathon and not a sprint. You come in when you can, you step back and take care of yourself when you have to, and hand the baton off to somebody else and step back in when you are refreshed and recharged. And right before we talked, I listened to your episode on burnout and I was like, oh man, there's so many of the same thoughts going in my head because burnout is really a problem in this field of like, this is such a personal issue that you're fighting for not just people's rights, but you're fighting for your own rights. And it's so easy to just want to get involved in everything and burn yourself out while you are trying to fight to protect everybody.
And you speak to something that, in my personal experience and all of these conversations that I've had on this podcast about stuckness, that seems to be universal, is this idea that in order for change to count, to be kind of registered, it has to be big. But that's really not the sustainable way to change for many of us, right? Where real change happens is these small steps forward. And then those small steps add up. And then when you multiply that to the collective, when there's so many of us making these small steps forward, that does ultimately manifest in huge change.
I always talk on the podcast of we have that how you can get involved section. And sometimes it's literally call your congressperson about this thing that's happening. Sometimes it's donating to an abortion fund, but sometimes it's just having conversations with people. And it sounds like you're not really doing anything, but you don't know who you're talking to at any given moment and what you're going to say that may change their mind. And I will give you a story about that. I went to grad school for global environmental policy. I know, not at all repro. And right before I was going, I went to this dinner for one of my mom's clients that was being honored for something. And it was assigned seating. And so I got stuck at a table with a bunch of people I didn't know. So the person next to me was asking me what I was doing and where I was going to school and whatever. And he owned a corporation in town. And I was like, oh, I'm studying global environmental policy. I really care about the environment and blah, 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 blah. We had this conversation and, a little bit of back and forth because they owned, I don't want to do any identifying thing, but it is with home building type stuff. We'll leave it at that. And so there was a little bit of pushback. I think we were talking about forest stuff. And so a little bit of back and forth. I didn't think anything of it. Whatever. So it was a dinner. Okay. He later told my mom just how impressed he was by me and the conversation we had. And, a couple of years later, they started a green building initiative. Now, am I saying I was the person that did that? No, for sure not. But it could be one of those conversations that helped plant a seed or nurtured a seed that was already maybe there. So you don't know in what conversations you have where you are sharing ideas. And again, be safe. Don't put yourself out there in an unsafe situation. Your self-care comes first, your safety comes first, but just you never know where you can change people's minds in ways with just a simple conversation.
It's like the idea of the butterfly effect, right?
Yeah.
A butterfly flaps its wings and there's a tsunami on the other side of the world. You don't know who you're talking to, where they're at, what kind of influence they have. And something that you said can influence that person who then have a conversation with another person. And then all of a sudden, this kind of train of change is started. And I 100% agree. Those individual conversations are super important. So, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of us are feeling stuck. And I think most of us are aware that sexual reproductive rights are under threat in our country and that things are changing. And for many of us and our ideology, not for the better. But also, to your point earlier, there is a lot happening. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of overwhelm where the rhetoric and conversations, it can be hard to focus. And that feeling of overwhelm can make people take a step back and not really be in the loop with what's going on. So I would love to talk about the current state of sexual reproductive rights in this country as we transition into the second Trump administration. Where are we in terms of sexual reproductive rights? And in your perspective, why do you feel that people are feeling so stuck in response to that?
Okay, so this is big, right? There's so much happening. And first, where are we? It is not good. Abortion is banned or highly restricted with, bans at 6 weeks in 17 states. So that means people in 17 states are unable to access care in their own state. So that's the first part. And just A flag for your audience, just to be clear, I am going to use gender neutral language when possible to be as inclusive as possible. It's not only women who need abortions, there's trans people, there's non binary people. We want to make sure that we are being as inclusive as possible. And if I say women, that's probably because that's what the data says. So just if you see me going back and forth, that's probably why, because that's what the data is about. But abortion isn't the only place we are seeing states failing when it comes to sexual reproductive health. So, one of those areas is thinking through, and they're all interconnected. And I think that's really important to think about, is sex education. Sex education is not something that's mandated federally. The policy is set at the state level. Sex education can vary widely, state by state, school district by school district. I know how important it is to get good sex education. And there are so many states that don't mandate any, or they don't include condoms or birth control. So young people are being failed from the very jump. Some states don't allow young people to consent to birth control. That's another failure. Some states don't mandate that hospitals tell sexual survivors about emergency contraception, nor do they require the hospital give it to them. That's another big failure that is always shocking and upsetting to me. States under the Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, however you want to look at it, it said states could expand their Medicaid coverage up to 139% of the federal poverty level. And we think about it, Medicaid is a really big sexual and reproductive health program. It covers maternal health care, it covers family planning, all very important sexual and reproductive health needs. A number of states, I think we're at 8 right now, have not opted to make that expansion yet. States also can expand their family planning program more. Not every state takes advantage of that. Some states restrict insurance coverage, private insurance coverage for abortion. A number of states have banned gender affirming care for young people. Honestly, it could go on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you think about these bans on abortion, we'll go back to the main one because, again, so much to talk about. And again, you can feel that overwhelm, right? There's so many areas that are being attacked, it's hard to keep up. But when you're thinking about abortion, all of these things, they don't impact everybody equally. They have the most disproportionate impact on Black people, Indigenous people, other people of color, people with disabilities, young people, people with low incomes, and the LGBTQ community, and those who sit at multiple intersections of those identities. And to give you just like a little idea of how that happens, okay, so abortion is banned in 17 states, or almost completely banned in 17 states. That means that people need to travel to access care. Okay, how are you going to travel? Can you take days off of work? Do you have a car to get there? And if you live in Florida, you have to travel very far. If you live in Texas, you have to travel really far. You may need a plane. Do you have the money to pay for that abortion? Because Medicaid says they're not going to pay for it. And if the state you travel to doesn't either, like, are you going to be able to afford it? Okay, so maybe you need to save more money before you can travel. Well, now you're running into your abortion's more expensive because it's later in the pregnancy. That state may have a gestational ban that, while not 6 weeks, maybe it's 20 weeks. Well, now you can't get it in that state you thought you were going to go to. So you have to travel further. You need a hotel room because there's a waiting period. All of these laws interact and really prevent people from accessing care. And it's this really complicated web that people are having to navigate. And it makes it so hard for people to get access to care. And when you're confronted with that, you can get stuck if you don't know where to go to get information. You can be stuck when you're trying to think, how do I fix this whole mess? Like, where do I attack? It all just makes you want to give up. And personally, where I get stuck, okay, I can deal with thinking through some of the policy implications, but I start thinking about that person. That person who is pregnant and doesn't want to be, is trying to navigate this and can't. They don't have the money, they don't have the resources, they can't take the time off of work. And that's where I get paralyzed if I focus on that part. because that has lifelong implications for this person's life. We know the Turnaway study did research on this of like what this means for people. And so they researched on women 10 years later. You weren't able to get the wanted abortion. What did that mean? It meant that they were more likely to stay with abusive partners or stay connected to abusive partners. They were more likely to experience poor physical health, more likely to suffer from depression or anxiety, to have poor economic outcomes for years, and to be more likely to experience serious complications, including death. So, like, these are real impacts on people's lives. And I think that gets forgotten so often, that these are people who are just trying to live their lives in the way that is best for them. Sorry, that was a
Uh,
lot and a lot
no.
to think about, but it was scene setting that felt important to start with.
Yeah, and I'm getting emotional as you talk because I feel the same way in where I really get stuck. I think about that person that sees that
Yeah.
pregnancy test and is pregnant and doesn't want to be. And now all of the barriers that are in that person's way to living the life that they want to live and having the future that they want to have. Like that should be a right. Like bringing a child into the world, it's a lifelong impact. And if that's what you want, great. But if that's not what you want, that should also be an option. And like thinking about those challenges, and I'm glad that you brought up the multi-layered or the multifaceted challenges that go along with it. It's not just I can't get care where I am. It's I have to travel. I have to take time off of work. I need someone to bring me to travel with me because I can't go by myself.
I think people think it's so much easier than it actually is. There aren't really that many clinics. Like, clinics have been closing. Clinics in states where there is abortion acts are taking on all of these people traveling. Like, it's all very complicated, and, like, so you might not be able to even get that appointment right away. It may be a little while before you can get that appointment, and that's even people living in states with access, right? Because if those clinics are trying to absorb people from other states, like, it all gets very complicated.
Well, and then there's also, as we have already started to see, some of the unintended implications of these policies, where it's not just people seeking abortions, it's people that have an ectopic pregnancy or people that have a pregnancy that's not viable. And people are literally dying as a result of these policy changes.
And what boggles my mind is that they don't care.
Like that doesn't compute with me. And you're
No.
right, they don't. But it's like when I think about what's happening right now, and I don't know if you have, I know that you are very entrenched in everything
Yeah.
that's going on, much more so than I am. But when I take the time to really sit and think about what is happening right now, I have a really hard time connecting to the logic of it, the absolute lack of compassion and lack of value of human life, of humans that already exist. It really, it's baffling to me. All of it just makes me feel very stuck.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, like, if I try to have conversations with those people, like, I would get stuck. But there are some people you're never gonna convince. And you know what? I'm not gonna waste my time having those conversations at this point. There are people whose minds I can change. There are policies I can push to make sure that people are able to access care. I can convince people of ways that they can take action to mitigate harms. I mean, this is really where we're at right now, is trying to stop things from getting worse, trying to mitigate harm, while at the same time trying to make policies, get to a place where we can enact policies that will actually make things better. And I think the other thing that is really important to think about at this moment My podcast started 7 years ago talking about all the ways we were failing on reproductive health and rights. This was not a problem that happened because of the Dobbs decision. People already were not able to access care. So many people before Dobbs was enacted. So I think so many people think we just need to bring back Roe, but that was never enough. So many people were already left behind and prevented from getting care. We need to envision this world where people are able to exercise their right to bodily autonomy. And I say that because we need to also be thinking about gender affirming care, because the people trying to enact the gender affirming care bans are playing the exact same playbook. This is a fight over the right to control your body, and it's the same fight, and we cannot let them pick us off and try and separate these as two different conversations, because they are absolutely not. This is the same people doing the same things and running the same playbook. And so we saw abortion bans starting with young people, right? When Roe was enacted, they started coming for things like, okay, but young people at up to 18 need parental consent. So starting gender affirming care bans with young people is the exact same playbook. So we need to stay strong for each other. We need to show up for each other when we're talking about actions and ways people can get involved, making sure that if you see a rally for abortion rights and that is something you feel like you can do, right? Again, back to the you can't do all the things. We also need to be there and showing up for the trans community as well.
And yeah, I absolutely see what you're talking about, how the bans on gender affirming care, they're on the same trajectory that we have followed with sexual reproductive rights. And so logically, it makes sense to think that we will end.
It's not going to stop at young people.
Yep, that it's going to continue following the same trajectory, and we're going to end up exactly where we expect to end up.
Just like it's not going to stop at abortion. It's starting already to go to birth control.
You love podcasts, and so do I. I am always on the hunt for new podcasts, and I've got some good news for you. I have found a podcast that you are going to love. It's called Blue Sky, and it's hosted by Bill Burke. Each week, Bill chats with inspiring people who are tackling the world's toughest challenges with a fresh dose of hope and optimism. Created by the Optimism Institute, Blue Sky is here to balance out all of the doom and gloom we see in the media by offering a positive, forward-thinking view of the future. From climate change to AI, homelessness to immigration, Bill and his guests cover it all, bringing in diverse perspectives that leave you feeling inspired and uplifted. Every episode reminds you that no matter how cloudy things seem, there's always a blue sky above. It's all about shifting your perspective and finding hope in even the hardest conversations. So, if you're ready for a podcast that leaves you feeling good about where we're headed, check out Blue Sky on any major podcast platform. It's the perfect way to clear the clouds and embrace a brighter future. And really, what's better than that? I do want to focus on what we can do and how we can get unstuck. And there's two groups of people that I would love to speak to. I think I would love to speak to the people who these policies directly impact. The trans child and their parent who are unable to get care. The person who is pregnant and doesn't want to be and lives in an abortion ban state. The people who are living in real fear of how this will impact them and their lives and their futures. And then also, I want to speak to the people who are outraged and want to fight this and want to support those people that this directly impacts. Because I think that there is overlap, but for people that this directly impacts, I think it's about getting those people resources, helping them navigate these policies. And for people who it doesn't necessarily directly impact, but they want to be a part of the fight, that's a conversation about activism and how we can support that community and getting those policy changes. So let's start with the people who this directly impacts. For the people who are feeling overwhelmed by these policy changes and afraid of how this is going to impact them and their lives. In your work, in your professional experience and knowing the different resources available, what advice and insight and support would you offer those people on like how to take steps forward within this feeling of stuckness that I'm sure many are feeling?
And I'm gonna say right off the bat, one of my things, I'm sorry that I don't have great resources for people with trans kids right now. I think some of that stuff has not caught up to where the abortion space is, because the abortion space hasn't been doing it for so much longer. I think it will get there and you'll have more of those resources. But I think in both of these spaces, information is power, and that is the really important thing at the moment. So, one of the places, if you are unsure of what the laws are in your own state for gender affirming care, there's a great resource called the Movement Advancement Project, and it will show you what the laws are. It actually has more LGBTQ laws in it, but it does have specifically what's around gender affirming care, what's banned, what's not banned. Another person that I follow very closely, she does a ton of reporting in this space to keep up to date on what's happening in states. She's following very closely the case that was at the Supreme Court, is Erin Reed. Her handle on a lot of social media is Erin in the Morning. She's got a great newsletter that you can subscribe to. There's a paid version, but there's also a free version to get out all the information. She sends out a daily, almost daily at least, news of like what is happening, and I follow her work very closely. That is how I stay informed, and unfortunately I feel like that is all I can offer for people with trans kids at the moment. There isn't going to be some of that same stuff that I can offer to people who are looking for abortions. I really hope that that space gets built up, and I'm sure it will. And honestly, some of the abortion stuff may be a good places to look into, because a lot of abortion clinics also do gender affirming care. So they may be able to help you out. And if I hear of more resources, like I will definitely be sharing them as I hear about them. So for people who are looking for abortion, there are a couple great places to direct you. There's a website, two websites, one called I Need NA. And that will, if you go put in where you're at, you can put in how many weeks along you are, and it will point you to the closest clinic where you can get an appointment. A great resource. The other resource I would point people to is abortionfinder.com. Abortionfinder.com or ineedana.com, both great resources, both do very much the same thing. If you are in a place where you can't afford an abortion, check out your local abortion fund. They're a great resource. Some of them have practical support where they can help you with travel as well, hook you up with somebody who can drive. Really find your local abortion fund. And if you don't know who they are, the National Network of Abortion Funds can connect you with who your local abortion fund is. There's some national ones as well, but you can find your local one. The clinic that you go to may also be able to connect you with your local abortion fund. We'll get to abortion funds more later because there's a lot everybody can do for them. I think those are like the two biggest resources. If you have concerns over laws in your state, you can contact If, When, How, and they can help you. I think there are just like a lot of great resources. And if you go to a clinic or you do telehealth where you get abortion pills mailed to you, and they're very safe. Abortion pills are very safe. The only thing you have to worry about is you could be at risk for criminalization in your state.
And the risk of criminalization, is that in the same 17 states that currently have the abortion ban?
It's a little more complicated than that, but yes. So, if you get pills mailed to you, they're very safe. If you run into any legal issues, connect with the Repro Legal Defense Fund. They're there to help you in those cases. Not everybody has risk equally. So just kind of keep that in mind. I think those are like the main resources I would point people to at the moment. We have a resources page on our website that has links to lots of these places. So if you want to check that out at reprosfightback.com and then go to resources, we have lots of other places where you can get more information and get involved when we talk about ways other people can get involved.
I will go ahead and link that in the show notes so that people who are listening can very easily access that list of resources.
Yes. So the I Need an A, Abortion Finder, and then your local abortion funds, I think, are really the most important ones for people who are trying to find abortion care in their own state or anywhere, actually. But if you have to travel, find your closest clinic.
Yes, thank you for sharing those resources. I'm sure that they are going to be infinitely helpful to anyone who finds themselves in that very, very challenging position. So now let's talk about for people like me, right? People who are absolutely not on board with the direction that things are going and want to take a stand and do something, just do something to move the needle in the right direction, but who are feeling stuck because, like, we don't know what to do. What direction would you point them in?
So back to you can't do all the things. So I'm going to list a number of things people can do. You can't do all of them. I personally know that I cannot go to like the big marches and stuff. They give me anxiety. It's not my place. It's not good for my mental health. So I don't do it. You find the ways that you can get involved that work for you. This is not a checklist of like you're the best advocate ever if you do all of them. These are just here are various ways that people can get involved. So don't get stuck thinking to be the best, I have to do all the things. You do not. There are many ways. My personal favorite is rage donating. When I get mad at things about a new policy I see put in place, I very likely turn to rage donating. Now, this is good, but it can also be a problem, right? Roe fell, so you didn't see this state had this new ban as much. So some of that rage donating has trickled off. If you can, what is amazing is if you could be a monthly donor, particularly to abortion funds. This is not saying donate $100 a month. No, 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 no. It can be 10, it can be 5, whatever is comfortable for you. But then they know they are getting those $5 every month and they're better able to plan. And abortion funds really need that right now to be able to plan and for how they can help people. And monthly donation goes a long way.
And are the abortion funds by the state? Like, does it make sense to donate to abortion funds in states that are having challenges? Or, like, what is the most effective way to donate from that perspective?
Yeah, actually, there's a lot of ways. So I donate to the DC Abortion Fund. Actually, I donate to a couple, but I'm a monthly for the DC Abortion Fund. They get a lot of people who travel to DC. So they are actually putting out a lot of money. But the abortion funds in your state, if your state is banned, also is probably doing the same. So I don't know that there is a better or only. So I spread it out to a couple abortion funds, but find the one you like and so you can donate. But another way you can get involved is volunteering. Abortion funds have ways you can get involved. Everybody's really busy right now, so it may be a little slow to get back to you. But if you're interested, I talked about some have practical support where they can drive patients to a clinic. They can get them food if they need food. Like there are various ways you can get involved. So reaching out to the abortion fund is a good way to do that. Don't call the helpline, but reach out to your abortion fund to see if they have ways where you can get involved.
Can I share something here that I have found to be very helpful?
Yeah.
Another great way in terms of volunteering, if you have a certain skill, if you are a graphic designer, if you are a copywriter, if there is something that you do in your professional, personal life that could be helpful in forwarding these missions, that's also a really great way to get involved. It doesn't have to be, you're volunteering at a clinic or at a fund. It could be just taking whatever it is that you do and that you love and using that to contribute to the cause.
Absolutely. Another way that people can get involved is clinic escorts. a lot of times people go and protest at clinics, and that's one more hurdle that patients have to face when they go to get care, is like going through this line of people who are yelling hateful things at them. So having a friendly face that's there to greet them and walk them in and help block out the crowd is really great. So, finding out if your clinic wants, not all clinics want escorts, but if your clinic does, finding ways to volunteer to become a clinic escort can really make a difference, again, to that person who is trying to get care and is encountering this other hurdle as they're trying to access care. Be a resource. This does not mean you need to know all the things. You don't need to know about all the laws or all the things. But if you are a trusted person who can point people to the right place, that is huge for people. So be a trusted resource. Kind of goes back to the having conversations things. If you can be a trusted resource, if somebody asks you, where can I get an abortion? You know that you can send them to I Need an A or to Abortion Finder. If they ask what the laws are in their state, you can send them to Guttmacher, who has like all of the laws you can look up in the state and see what hurdles they have to face. So be a resource for people to know where you can send people to get good information. In this time of mis and disinformation, being a trusted resource is invaluable. You don't need to know all the things. You just need to know where to send people.
Amazing. And then thank you for sharing all of those ways to get involved. And there's one thing that you mentioned and that you also mentioned earlier that I really want to circle back on. And that is this idea of having conversations, of impacting your sphere of influence, right? The people in your life, these conversations that you can be having. We are obviously living in a very divisive time where there is like a very big ideological divide. And to your point earlier, there's some people who you're never going to change their mind. They're never going to want to hear you. And like, that's fine. Those are not the people to be initiating conversations with. But if someone wants to start having these conversations in their life, what advice would you give them for initiating those conversations and managing those conversations and doing it in a way that feels safe?
I think a good entry place is if somebody asks you a question. Again, that mis and disinformation that floats around. I have had people ask me questions around like the proposed laws around trans girls in sports, and like they just want more information because what they're hearing, there's a lot of laws or bans that get passed because they sound good if you don't question them. But like once you like dig in a little deeper, you can see the harms. And so I think this is a place where if you have somebody who asks you a question and you feel comfortable answering and you feel like it's in good faith, like that is a great place to engage and just make sure you're giving them more information. Like I don't understand, like a 20-week ban sounds great. So like, okay, they seem like they're like, on the path. They're not where I want them to be with like no bans. But I can talk to them and say, hey, 20 weeks is when a lot of people are doing like fetal testing. You get bad results after that time. People need to be able to make decisions in conjunction with their doctor for what's best in their lives. Have you thought about all of the bans that are in place in all of these other states that make it harder for people to access care earlier in their pregnancy, which pushes them to access care later in their pregnancy? And so you can kind of start having these thoughtful conversations of not pushing people to change their mind, because like that never works, right? To be like, you're wrong. But like offering more information and helping move people along that path. Back to that, I didn't change that person's mind, but I might have planted seeds that help them along their path. And I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah, because then those seeds, they foster and they grow over time. And then finally, just you've talked about it quite a bit. And I think this is a very important piece, which is this misinformation and this disinformation. We are assaulted with so much information on a daily basis from so many different sources. And much of it is inaccurate or biased or spun in a way that is misleading. So, for people who want access to non biased, straightforward information that they can then use to support these conversations and combat some of that mis and disinformation, what are some of your recommended news sources, policy sources, things of that nature?
If I'm looking for like data and want to make sure like around what the laws are, how many people are impacted, things like that, I trust the Guttmacher Institute. That is where I go when I am writing things or anything like that. Like if I want accurate information, I go to Guttmacher. That is my first choice. If I'm looking for writing around a lot of the reproductive justice space, I really like Rewire News Group because this is what they write about. They know the laws front and back. They are able to explain it really well. I think a big problem we have in some of the reporting is that people who are writing about this are not experts in abortion. They are not experts in gender affirming care. So while they think they are telling the right story, they don't have the history and all of the knowledge of the fights that took to get us here to understand why when the antis are saying one thing, that's not really what they mean and that's not how they are acting. Rewire News Group really does a great job of having that history. And so when you read what they are writing, they are taking that into account as they are telling the story. And so things related to reproductive justice, I always turn there.
Amazing. Thank you so much for those sources. That's so helpful. Jennie, this conversation has been incredible, enlightening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you for having me. It's been so wonderful.
Yeah, if listeners want to connect with you, listen to the Repro podcast, learn more, how can they go about doing that?
Sure. So you can find rePROs Fight Back wherever you listen to your podcasts. We are on, I guess, all of the social media at rePROs Fight Back, except for Instagram, where we are at rePROs FB. You can find me. I'm really not on social media a ton anymore for my self care. I've been like slowly stepping back, but I still do engage a bit. My public facing ones are on Twitter and Blue Sky, and that's Jennie in DC. But yeah, definitely follow me. I'm always happy to chat with people. And I would love it if you would check out the podcast because, we didn't really talk about it a ton because it is this big place where you get stuck of like thinking what's coming in the next term, coming in the new year. But we'll be having podcast episodes breaking things down as things happen. And I think the other really important thing that I didn't mention at all, but I also do focus on global. And I think the really important thing to note is that what is happening in the US, the new administration is going to be working on exporting overseas, and it is going to have a profound impact on the lives of women and girls around the world. So if you're interested in any of those conversations, I would love to have you come check out rePROs Fight Back and hear about what is happening and continue to find ways that you can get involved.
I will also be linking the podcast in the show notes. And I have listened, can recommend go and listen to this podcast, learn, take what you can, and use it to make steps forward to get unstuck. Jennie, again, thank you so much for being here. I have one question that I ask all of my guests here on Season of Stuck. So if it's okay with you, I just have one more question for you.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not used to talking quite so much.
Okay, so imagining your ideal future self, like the Jennie that you were working every day to one day grow into. If she could travel back in time and talk to the today version of you, what advice do you think that she would give you on how to navigate stuckness at this point in your life and at this point in history?
My forever, Jennie, you do not need to do all the things. It is okay to take a step back. It is okay to ask for help and to rely on your community. They are there and they support you. You need to let them and not curl in on yourself and just try to buckle down and get it done because that way lies burnout and unhealthy habits. And you need to not do it all and ask and really just rely on your community.
That is profound advice for navigating everything that we talked about today and for navigating stuckness in general. So thank you, future Jennie. I will be taking that with me as well.
Man, I hope current Jennie takes it.
Right? I feel like our future selves are so wise, but only if we listen.
I know.
Thank you again, Jennie, for being here. It is so appreciated.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
Me too. That's it for today. A huge thank you to our guests for their incredible insights, and a huge thank you to you, our listeners. We know that there are so many podcasts out there to choose from, and we are just so grateful that you chose ours. If you enjoyed today's episode, consider recommending the podcast to a friend or family member that you think would enjoy it. And to make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever it is you get your podcasts. And while you're there, if you loved the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review. It plays such a huge part in getting this podcast out to a wider audience and ultimately supporting more people on their journey from stuck to unstuck. And to keep in touch and access even more stuck-related content, follow us on Instagram at Season of Stuck and visit our website, seasonofstuck.com, where you can sign up to get episodes delivered directly to your inbox. Thank you again for being here. It is so, so appreciated. Until next time, I'm Deanna DeBera, and you're listening to Season of Stuck.